They began to sense a new tension in the air, an intangible ripple through Castle Black as the days passed without overt signs of the other's advance. For many men, that lull gave room to hope. Perhaps the worst had been averted. Yet for others it was cause for deeper vigilance. Jon Snow found himself among the latter group, believing that if the enemy had simply withdrawn, they might be gathering might beyond mortal eyes. He woke each morning and stared at the bleak horizon, searching for any wisp of unnatural cold in the wind, any glimmer of that ghastly glow whites brought with them. So far there was nothing. Even so, the Watchers and their new northern allies kept training, drilling, forging arrowheads, maintaining a fortress now more populous than any had seen in living memory. Roughly a month had passed since Robb Stark, king in the north, led his large contingent to Castle Black. Together with Lord Commander Mormont, he organized the fortress into a hive of preparedness. Clusters of Umbers, Karstarks, Boltons, Manderleys, Serwyns, and Watchers mingled in the yard. Men joked that the realm's petty feuds had evaporated faster than warm breath on an icy morning. On some level, it was heartening to see so many house sigils working side by side. On another level, it underscored the gravity of the crisis. If the others truly descended, it would take all of them and more to hold. Still, no major sign had emerged that the others intended an assault. Scouts returned from beyond the wall with only scattered tales. A sighting of footprints here, a group of wildlings glimpsed there, nothing definitive. Eastwatch reported no new undead, and Olaf Umber's men had secured the coastal approaches. The mountainous region near the Shadow Tower remained calmer than expected. The Watchers tried to interpret this lack of activity, debating whether the threat was somehow abating or whether the true storm still brewed in hidden darkness. Mormont refused to let down his guard, instructing the men, "Best we keep the wall armed and the watch vigilant. We do not dare forget what we've already seen." Jon Snow upheld that directive. Each day, he helped train squads of Watchers and Northern volunteers in white-killing strategies. They formed ranks in the courtyard, brandishing torches, spears tipped with obsidian, swords cast aside for the more valuable glass. How to encircle a flailing wight, how to burn each limb thoroughly, how to avoid bites or scratches. Jon hammered these lessons home until men could recite them in their sleep. Arlen, Ser Arthur Dayne Incognito, still oversaw the forging of new arrowheads. Though the supply of raw obsidian from the north began to dwindle, they had built a decent stockpile. Arlen labored tirelessly, seldom speaking. The Watchers and the Northerners came to respect him as a stoic craftsman of uncanny skill. Robb Stark spent much of his time either training with the men or locked in councils with Mormont and various lords, exchanging letters with Winterfell or with the scattered armies still engaged in the Riverlands. He confided to Jon that the Lannister War had reached a bloody stalemate, and that Stannis Baratheon had retreated to Dragonstone after some disastrous engagement near Blackwater Bay. It seemed the South was consumed by political maneuvering, blind to the gathering threat in the North. At times, the frustration etched into Robb's face, though he seldom let it derail his presence among the men. Indeed, seeing the king in the north clad in thick furs, walking the ramparts with Watchers, had become a common sight. Grey Wind roamed the fortress with Ghost, the pair of direwolves forging an odd bond that mirrored the unity of Watchers and Northerners. Men occasionally gave them a wide berth, for both were large and sometimes fierce, but they recognized them as symbols of House Stark's guardianship. Jon often found Ghost curled next to Grey Wind in a patch of sunlight by the stables, content to share a silent companionship. In that lull, Castle Black underwent improvements. Robb ordered the building of extra watchtowers along the perimeter. The Umbers took to hauling logs from the southern edges of the Gift, erecting wooden walls where the fortress had been exposed. The Watchers marveled at how quickly the northern men accomplished these tasks. Great John Umber had returned to Winterfell, but Olaf had returned from Eastwatch, leading a group of carpenters who hammered day and night, ignoring the bitter cold. Men hammered together platforms on which archers could stand with dragonglass arrows. They refurbished old catapults, though there were questions about how effective catapults would be against the undead. Mormont deemed them an acceptable precaution. Jon observed all this with a mix of pride and unease. If the others never came, this fortress would be more secure than it had been in centuries. But if they did come in overwhelming numbers, would even this be enough? The Watchers had no illusions about the savage power of whites when driven en masse. Better to prepare as thoroughly as possible. For now, it seemed quiet, but the Watchers had grown wary of illusions. One afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived. A lone rider with a ragged black cloak, leading a weary horse. The gate guards almost shot him, suspecting a wildling or deserter. But the man called out that he was from the Watch, having traveled from the Shadow Tower with urgent tidings. They brought him inside, half-frozen. Mormont, Robb, and Jon gathered around the hearth in the common hall to hear the man's story. He introduced himself as Garin, a ranger who'd scouted near the Frostfangs. According to Garin, a wildling rumor circulated about Mance Raider's search for something called the Horn of Winter, said to have the power to bring down the wall. Tales might be exaggerated, but if Mance believed them, he might attempt to unearth such an artifact. Garin had found no proof, only hushed murmurings among wildling elders. But if Mance truly believed that a horn could shatter the wall, who knew what might come next? Robb frowned. Is this just wildling legend? Or is there real danger of them possessing such a horn? Garin shrugged, trembling from cold and fatigue. Legends say the horn can bring the dead. We Watchers cannot dismiss any threat now, not after all we've seen. Mormont pinched the bridge of his nose. The Horn of Winter. Old fables mention it. Some said it was lost beyond memory. The Watchers can't rule anything out. We must not let Raider unearth a power that shatters the wall. Thus, the Watchers once again felt a spark of alarm. Mormont mulled sending an expedition to the Frostfangs to glean more, but the region was vast and perilous. Robb offered a small group of northern men to accompany Watchers, though it would be a high-risk mission. In the end, Mormont decided to wait for more concrete evidence before dispatching men into the Frostfang labyrinth. We are strong here. If Raider threatens the wall, we stand ready. If any sign emerges that he truly has that horn, we'll act. For now, let's not lose good men in the wild goose chase of a rumor. Jon followed the conversation silently, recalling how House Stark placed stock in old legends. Might the Horn of Winter be as dire as they said, or was it simply another tale like so many? He recalled Samwell Tarly once reading of such a horn in some dusty tome. That memory stung, for Sam was not here. He had gone to Oldtown, or so rumor said, on some quest for knowledge. The Watchers missed Sam's gentle presence. Jon pushed aside the pang of longing. The tasks at hand demanded full focus. Days merged into a routine that almost felt normal for those at Castle Black. Men rose, ate a simple meal in the hall, then proceeded to training or repairs. Jon devoted hours to schooling novices in spearwork. Others patrolled beyond the wall, returning with no new sightings. Every evening, Mormont and Robb conferred about resources. Bolton men reported that supply lines from the Dreadfort region had stabilized. Manderley men said White Harbor still managed to send fish. Life functioned under the shadow of the greatest threat. Some Watchers let themselves hope the others had retreated for good. But Ed reminded them that whites had a habit of appearing when least expected. Then, on a cold, wind-swept dawn, horns brayed from the top of the wall, 2 blasts, echoing across the expanse. 2 blasts usually meant wildlings, though Watchers had learned it might also warn of whites. The fortress stirred into action, men scrambling to their positions. Jon, half-dressed, snatched up cloak and dagger, calling Ghost to him. Robb emerged from a side door, hand on his sword. An old habit, though steel was worthless against the undead. They exchanged a sharp look. Mormont's shouts sounded from the yard. "Man the walls! Archers, form up! Spearmen, to the gates!" Up on the ramparts, Watchers pointed north, exclaiming that they saw movement in the distance, human shapes more than a handful, possibly dozens. A scouting party from Mance? Or a wave of whites? No one knew. Snow flurried, obscuring details. Men lined the battlements, bows strung, dragonglass arrowheads knocked. Olaf stood with a group of umbers, brandishing torches. The courtyard teemed with men forming a ring inside the gate. If it was a wildling assault, they'd greet it with flame. If whites, so be it. As the shapes drew closer, watchers noted they moved in a ragged line, no obvious war formation. Some watchers said they glimpsed the glint of steel, others insisted it might be rags. Tension mounted. Then, a shout from a watchman. "They're carrying something, white flags?" That was perplexing. Mormont ordered men to hold fire, letting them approach unless they attacked. Robb, at Mormont's side, scanned the horizon with a borrowed far eye. He murmured, "It looks like a band of wildlings, all right, maybe 30 or 40, holding makeshift flags. No sign of whites among them. They might be seeking parley?" Men traded uncertain looks. Olaf grunted. "Wildlings rarely come peacefully. They might be deserting Mance." Mormont nodded. "Possibly. Let's not assume. Keep the gate closed until we confirm. John, you speak with them from the ramparts. See if they truly want peace. If it's a trap, we'll be ready." John took a position atop the gatehouse. Ghost stood behind him, tail swishing. Archers flanked him. The wildling column halted within bowshot, arms raised. Some watchers muttered in confusion. One of the wildlings, a tall man with furs layered thick, stepped forward and cupped his mouth to shout, "We come in peace. We are done with Mance's war. Let us pass, or at least hear us." His voice carried, but the howling wind cut some words short. John answered, calling down, "Who leads you? Why do you seek the watch?" The tall man waved an arm at the group. "Name's Jarl. We're free folk who parted ways with Mance's cause. He's lost his mind, chasing illusions. Some say he courts the others. We want no part. Let us pass through the wall or lay down our arms. We'd sooner bend the knee than join the dead." The watchers exchanged glances. This was unprecedented. Could a splinter group of wildlings truly be surrendering? Mormont climbed to John's side. Robb came up behind. The tall man, Jarl, spotted the black cloak and the regal figure of Robb with his direwolf. A hush fell among the wildlings as they realized King in the north stood above them. Mormont shouted, "If you truly mean peace, cast aside your weapons. Move slowly. Any threat, we loose arrows." Jarl nodded, barking orders. The wildlings dropped spears, axes, even a few battered swords. Then, with hands raised, they advanced to within 10 paces of the gate. Men on the ramparts tensed, bows half-drawn. Jarl removed his fur hood, revealing a lined face. He called up, "We starve in the wild. Mance Raider leads men to doom. We want refuge or at least safe passage. Mance thinks to open the way for the others, or so rumors say. We want no part in that madness. We'll yield if we must." His voice carried a raw honesty. The watchers murmured. The free folk seldom offered to yield. Mormont glanced at Robb and John, expression pensive. Robb said softly, "They might be desperate but sincere. Let's not spurn them if they truly want to forsake Mance. They could provide intelligence." Mormont nodded. "Open the gates slightly. We'll allow them inside under guard. If they betray us, we're armed." So the watchers cranked the gate open, letting a small gap appear. Archers stood ready to loose arrows if the wildlings tried anything. Jarl led his people in, eyes darting warily at the black-cloaked watchers arrayed inside. The courtyard bristled with men brandishing torches or spears. The wildlings kept their hands visible, some trembling. Many looked starved, clothes threadbare. Women and children appeared among them, possibly families. Mormont stepped forward, flanked by John and Robb. Jarl paused, swallowing hard. Mormont spoke in a ringing voice. "You say you renounce Mance Raider and want to pass the wall or find refuge. The Watchers are not known for letting free folk roam the realm. Yet if you truly disclaim the war, we might consider your plea. What do you know of Mance's plans?" Jarl exhaled. "They whisper of a new alliance with powers beyond mortal ken. Some claim he's been visited by Pale Riders, that he aims to breach the wall soon. Others say he's frantically searching for an artifact to break the wall. Many wildlings want no part of that. We fear the others more than we fear you crows. So we fled. A hush fell. Robb studied the ragged group, noticing children clinging to mothers. These didn't look like vicious raiders. He exchanged glances with Mormont. Then he addressed them. I am Robb Stark, king in the north. If you truly reject Mance's cause and vow no harm to my people, we can consider offering you a safe place, though you must obey our laws. We cannot simply let you roam free. Are you prepared to accept that? Jarl nodded eagerly. Yes, my lord. We'll accept your laws or help in whatever tasks so long as we live. Starvation waits for us out there. And Mance's madness leads only to an icy grave. Mormont looked at the watchers. Some scowled, not trusting wildlings. Others shrugged. The new men from the north also bore complicated expressions. But none wanted to cast out women and children if they were sincere. Mormont let out a breath. Very well. We will house you for now. You'll remain under guard until we confirm your sincerity. If you prove peaceful, we'll find you tasks to support the watch. If you betray us, you'll face the consequences. The wildlings nodded in relief. A smattering of watchers stepped forward to escort them. The courtyard relaxed minutely. Jon observed how truly desperate the wildlings looked, especially the children with hollow cheeks. War and winter had taken a toll. Mormont whispered to Jon, "We must keep an eye on them, but perhaps this helps us learn of Mance's next move." Jon agreed. That evening, the watchers found makeshift quarters for the newcomers. Guards posted watch near them. A few old storerooms were emptied to provide minimal shelter. The wildlings accepted it gratefully, likely happier than they'd been in weeks. The watchers supplied them with broth and bread, though rations were not bountiful. Mormont, Robb, and Jon interviewed Jarl in the old command room. The man's face twitched with nerves, but he answered questions straightforwardly. He claimed Mance was massing a large portion of his forces near a place called the Milkwater, intending to push south once a sign was given. Jarl suspected that sign was either the Horn of Winter or some direct pact with the others. Many free folk dreaded the notion of aiding the dead, so some deserted. Jarl's band was but one example. More might come, he said, if we can survive to reach your wall. They might also be killed by Mance's loyalists or by whites in the forest. I cannot say. Robb rubbed his temples. So Mance grows bolder, searching for a way to breach us. If he truly allied with the others, we face an attack from both living wildlings and undead. We must be ready. Mormont's gaze hardened. Yes, and if the Horn of Winter is real, we have to assume the worst. The Watchers must gather every last bit of resources. We cannot let the men grow complacent. They dismissed Jarl, placing him under guard. Mormont turned to Robb and Jon. We have to assume an assault may come soon. Let us double the perimeter patrols. Keep the men on high alert. They set about adjusting rosters. Extra watchers patrolled beyond the wall, rotating shifts to avoid exhaustion. The northern men took up positions along the ramparts, brandishing spears and torches. Catapults were readied, though no one was sure how they'd fare against whites. The new wildlings were supervised daily. They cooperated, mending clothes or assisting in the kitchens. Some watchers eyed them with suspicion, others with grudging empathy. Jarl kept to his vow, telling all he could about Mance's rumored movements, and so Castle Black braced once more. Tension simmered in every corridor, men half expecting horns to sound at any moment. Another fortnight slipped by. Patrols returned with ambiguous reports, fresh footprints near certain ridges, the occasional glimpse of figures in the forest. No direct attacks. The watchers spent each night scanning the horizon, waiting for that clarion call. As the days passed, morale threatened to dip, for men grew weary of constant readiness. Yet Robb and Mormont strove to keep spirits high, pointing to how well they had prepared. The fortress was stronger than it had been in generations, brimming with alliance. If the others came, they would find a fortress not easily broken. One evening, word came from Winterfell that Lady Catelyn had successfully negotiated a truce of sorts in certain parts of the Riverlands, freeing more northern men to be dispatched if the Watchers needed them. Mormont accepted the letter with relief. Possibly even more men could come, tipping the scales further. Robb mused that they might soon have almost 1,000 men at Castle Black. Could that be enough to repel any direct assault by wildlings or whites? None could say, but it helped to see the muster continuing. The Watchers realized they might not face the end alone. Winter's grip tightened further, days growing shorter, nights longer. Jon found himself trudging through snow drifts in the courtyard, seeing how the training had become nearly second nature to the men. Even those from House Bolton or Karstark now reflexively carried torches with them, mindful that a white might appear out of nowhere. Arlen's forge corner glowed day and night, pumping out obsidian edges. The fortress had never been so bustling. Ghost roamed with that silent grace, often accompanied by gray wind. Then, at last, a real sign emerged of Mance's intentions. A scouting party returned from beyond the wall, battered and breathing hard. They claimed they had spotted a huge wildling force, maybe 1,000 strong, amassing about 3 days' ride away, near a place the Watchers called the Lonely Hills. The scouts insisted they saw banners, heard horns, glimpsed hundreds of campfires. At night, eerie shapes moved among the trees. It might not be just wildlings, they warned. They suspected whites too. One scout had glimpsed a pale walker on a dead horse, though at a distance. If true, Mance's rumored alliance with the others had borne fruit. When Mormont heard, he convened a war council with Robb, Bolton, Karstark, Olaf, and other leaders. They gathered in a makeshift strategy chamber. Tension ran high. Mormont's gravelly voice rang. So, Mance is near with a vast host, possibly whites among them. Then, we must stand behind the wall, force them to attempt an assault. If the others are with them, we face the darkest foe of all. Robb's mouth set in a grim line. We have prepared for this. Our men are disciplined, well armed with dragonglass. The Watchers hold the ramparts with archers. I propose we remain in a purely defensive posture. Let Mance come to us. He cannot bypass the wall easily, and if he tries to scale or breach it, we'll meet him with flame. Lord Bolton, eyes cold, nodded. Agreed. Yet we must watch for sabotage. The Horn of Winter, if it truly can bring down the wall, might be Mance's trump card. Karstark rubbed his beard. If they blow it near the base, we risk losing everything. We must keep a heavy guard inside the wall's tunnels. Ensure no infiltration. Mormont folded his arms. We have men posted. We'll double that. Let us also prepare catapults on the ramparts. If they mass near the foot of the wall, we rain fire. Olaf nodded fiercely. And obsidian bombs, if possible. My men can rig flasks of oil with shards inside. Thus, final measures were agreed upon. The Watchers spread word across the fortress. An attack might come soon. The men did not panic, but the undercurrent of dread stiffened into readiness. Torches and braziers flamed day and night. Patrols retreated from far scanning, focusing on the immediate perimeter. Everyone wanted to be fresh for the main assault. 3 nights later, horns sounded from the wall at midnight. 2 blasts, followed by a third. 3 blasts had always been rumored to signal the others, but Watchers seldom used it as it was an ancient call. The clarion notes echoed, chilling men's blood. The fortress roused with frantic speed, men stumbling from bedrolls, seizing dragonglass. Alarmed Watchers hollered, 3 blasts! Torches flared. The courtyard erupted in motion. Jon jerked awake, pulling on boots, calling for Ghost. Robb rushed in, face set with cold fury. It's begun, he said, voice taut. They sprinted outside. The top of the wall was alive with archers peering into the blackness. Snow whipped in strong gusts, swirling flakes across the yard. Jon scrambled up the icy stairs, Ghost at his heels. Robb followed, struggling with the swirling wind. At the summit, Watchers pointed north, exclaiming that they saw an immense shadow moving across the horizon. Men brandished torches, eyes wide. Sure enough, thousands of tiny lights flickered in the distance, like an approaching sea of sparks. Campfires or torches, wildlings, presumably, but the Watchers swore they saw other shapes, pale illusions gliding through the gloom. A distant horn blared, echoed by the wall's monstrous hush. Mormont stood near the edge, cloak whipping in the gale. Olaf was there too, cursing the wind. Marsh commanded lines of archers, each arrowhead of obsidian glistening under torchlight. Jon reached them, breath ragged. "Is that Mance's host?" he gasped. Mormont nodded. "Aye, the biggest host we've ever seen. And if the others walk among them, we face the darkest night indeed." Robb grimaced, leaning over to see. "We hold the wall," he repeated. "Is everyone in position?" Marsh responded that each gate was manned, the catapults loaded with barrels of oil and obsidian shards. The northern men lined the ramparts in thick ranks. They were silent, bracing for the approach. In the gloom, the sparks moved slowly, drawing nearer. The watchers could hear drumming or perhaps chanting carried on the wind. Ghost let out a low growl. Gray wind, somewhere behind, howled. It felt as though the entire world held its breath. Jon's heart pounded. If Mance tried to assault the wall directly, their preparations would be tested. If they had the Horn of Winter, gods help them. As the hours crawled, the shapes drew closer until watchers could make out the mass of wildlings below, strung across a broad front. Dim shapes of mammoths, too, if rumor was right, hauling siege logs. Among them, men with torches chanting in some guttural language. Then, from a vantage post, a watcher shouted that he saw pale riders at the rear. The blood in Jon's veins turned to ice. The others were indeed there. Just before dawn, the wildling horns blared in harsh dissonance. The host advanced in earnest, building momentum across the open ground. Mormont roared, "Archers ready?" The watchers drew their bows, hearts thundering. Robb stepped up to the battlements, calling to his men. "Hold fast. Aim true." The advancing throng came within range. "Loose!" Marsh bellowed. A volley of obsidian-tipped arrows arced through the dim sky, hissing downward. Some wildlings fell, screeching. Others pressed on, shields raised. Another volley, men reloading frantically. Torches flamed along the rampart. Mance's columns slammed into the base of the wall, carrying ropes, grappling hooks, ladders. The watchers hurled flaming barrels of oil. Fire flared below, igniting screams of terror. Some wildlings tried to scale, but the watchers shot them off the ropes. Mammoths bellowed, straining to drag huge logs that hammered the gate. The entire fortress quaked. Bolts from Ballisti's sword, some missing in the swirl of chaos, others skewering beasts. The wildlings fought valiantly, waves of them piling up. Yet the watchers, now numerous and well-disciplined, rained death from above. Suddenly, a deep horn note resounded from the midst of the wildling host, different from their usual calls. A vibration rippled in the air. Men on the wall felt it in their chests. The Horn of Winter? Jon froze, dread coiling. Mormont shouted, "Steady! We do not know if it can truly break the wall. Keep firing." Arrows flew, catapults flung more flame. A second horn blast reverberated, making watchers flinch. Cracks formed on some lumps of ice along the rampart's edge. Olaf cursed, ordering men to brace. The wind howled. At the base of the wall, movement parted the lines, revealing a group of robed figures. One raised a massive horn carved from pale bone. A third blast erupted, unbelievably loud. Chunks of ice shuddered loose from the surface in small avalanches. The watchers gasped, hearing groans within the ice. Ghost whined behind Jon. Mormont clenched his fists, face paler than usual. Robb seized a nearby torch, raging, "Stop them!" Archers pivoted to target the hornbearer, but whites emerged from the shadow, intercepting the arrow fire. Yes, whites among the living, a horrifying union. Down below, whites clashed with wildling loyalists to Mance's cause, forging a ghastly barrier to protect the horn. The watchers launched flaming barrels, but the undead flung them aside with superhuman strength. Men shrieked. The watchers redoubled arrow fire, some hitting the robed ring of figures. But the hornbearer kept blowing, unleashing another bone-shaking note. The ice rumbled ominously, cracks forming at the base. "Gods help us," Marsh whispered. Jon stared wide-eyed, terror pounding in his skull. The entire wall might be threatened if that horn truly held magical power. Then, from behind the robed figures, a new shape emerged, tall, pale, astride a skeletal horse. Another. Its eyes gleamed blue in the gloom. It lifted a slender blade that shimmered with unnatural cold. For a heartbeat, watchers halted their onslaught, transfixed by fear. The other pointed the blade at the gate, as if commanding the whites forward. More emerged from the forest, moaning in that inhuman hush, limbs jerking with lethal intent. They swarmed the gate, ignoring the wildlings they trampled. The watchers on the wall cried out, unleashing more arrows, more flame. Even so, the whites pressed inexorably forward, pulling at debris, smashing with unnatural force. Mormont roared, "Focus on the hornbearer. If that truly can topple the wall, we must end him now." Archers aimed, but the whites shielded the robed figure. The watchers fired, a few arrows slipping through. One arrow stuck the robed figure's thigh, eliciting a pained scream. Another lodged in the hornbearer's chest, but the figure did not collapse. A swirl of dark magic or unstoppable will kept him standing. The watchers cursed. More blasts of that horn shook the ice. Sections of the wall's outer layer cracked, sending shards tumbling. The entire fortress quaked. Olaf bellowed from a lower platform, urging men to fling barrels of blazing pitch. They soared, crashing among the whites and wildlings alike. Flames whooshed, screams erupted. Amid the chaos, Jon realized the robed figure had advanced closer, forcing a path behind a bulwark of whites. If he reached a certain point near the wall's base, maybe the horn's magic would intensify. Robb, standing nearby, locked eyes with Jon. "We have to destroy that horn. Perhaps a sortie from the gate? Risky, but we might break through." Mormont overheard, face grim. "The gate is battered, and whites crowd the entrance. But if we don't act, the horn might truly bring the wall down. We cannot wait." Marsh argued that opening the gate even partially let in a flood of whites. Olaf insisted that a small but elite group might cut their way to the hornbearer. Another monstrous blast shuddered the ice. Mormont clenched his jaw. "We do it, then. A small band, well armed with dragonglass, will sally out. The rest keep firing from above. Jon, you lead them. The king in the north stays or goes as he sees fit." Robb's lips pressed thin. "I'm coming. This is do or die." Mormont didn't protest. Time was too short. He signaled watchers to open a small sally port near the main gate, big enough for a handful of men. Jon assembled a strike team: Robb, Arlen, Olaf, Ed, and about 10 more watchers. Each carried dragonglass, torches, flasks of oil. They raced down the steps, ignoring trembling walls, while overhead the archers continued raining arrows. The sally port groaned as men pulled the lever. Whites swarmed outside, pounding at the fortifications. The watchers inside braced, then yanked the door open just enough to surge out in a wedge. Fire and obsidian led their charge. Jon thrust his torch at the first white that lunged, engulfing it in flame. Olaf's huge axe cleaved a second. Robb, face set with fierce resolve, impaled another with a dragonglass spear, letting Ed douse it in oil. Flames roared. The group carved a path, stepping over charred remains. More whites converged. The watchers pressed onward, forging a ring that advanced through the undead as archers from the wall leant covering fire. Ghost and gray wind bounded in the front, ripping at white limbs. In the swirl of battle, men shouted instructions, hammered torches, let out war cries. Whites shrieked, battered by obsidian. The stench of burning flesh clogged the air. Darkness fought with the glare of flames. Step by bloody step, Jon's wedge moved toward the hornbearer. They glimpsed the robed figure near the front, staggering from arrow wounds. But another on horseback flanked him, blade raised. Any watchers who tried to approach were forced back by waves of whites. Robb nearly lost his footing on a slick patch of gore. Ed pulled him upright just in time, jabbing at a White's face with a torch. Arlen used his spear with lethal precision, thrusting in quick arcs, each strike accompanied by screeches as undead limbs flailed. They advanced further, maybe 20 yards from the horn-bearer. Another monstrous blast rang out, making the earth quake. Chunks of ice rained from the wall's surface. Jon winced, heart in his throat. If that horn shattered the wall's foundation, the entire fortress might fall. The watchers roared defiance, hacking and burning. The robed figure coughed, lifting the huge horn to blow again, but an arrow from overhead clipped his hood, spinning him sideways. The watchers seized the chance, surging. Olaf barreled in, cutting down 2 Whites. Robb hammered aside another, stomping its chest to keep it pinned for a finishing blow. Jon lunged through a gap, eyes fixed on the horn-bearer. The mounted other noticed him, turning that eerie blade Jon recognized from old accounts. Ice-cold steel that seemed to shimmer. In a blur of motion, the other slashed down. Jon dove aside, feeling the blade's chill pass close. A swirl of dead wind battered him. The robed figure attempted to blow the horn again, but Arlen's spear flashed from behind, impaling the man's shoulder. He let out a wet scream, dropping the horn to the blood-soaked ground. In that second, the watchers saw an opening. The horn lay exposed. Ghost lunged at the robed figure, jaws snapping. The figure shrieked, thrashing. Meanwhile, the other brought its steed around, blade shimmering. Robb rushed in with a dragonglass dagger, aiming for the horse's flank. The beast reared, undead eyes rolling. Ed flung a torch at the horse's face, forcing it back. The other hissed like scraping ice. Jon scrambled, grabbing the horn from the ground. The huge instrument felt unnaturally cold, carved from some massive bone. He had to destroy it. Another swirl of Whites closed in, seeking to protect it. Olaf and Arlen formed a protective ring. Jon fumbled for his flask of oil, yanking the cork with his teeth. He poured it over the horn, let it soak the cords wrapped around it. Then, with trembling hands, he ignited it using his torch. Flame whooshed, dancing along the horn's length. The material blackened, cracks forming as if the horn resisted destruction. A keening sound erupted, either magical or simply escaping air. Whites shrieked. The watchers pressed the advantage, slaying them with savage efficiency. The other hissed again, dismounting in a swirl of frost. It strode forward, blade raised, clearly enraged that the horn was being burned. Robb sprang at the other, brandishing his obsidian spear. The other sidestepped with inhuman grace, slicing in a flurry. Sparks of cold flared. The spear's shaft cracked under the chill. Robb staggered, dropping the shattered spear. Ed hurled a dragonglass dagger, but the other batted it aside with that shimmering blade. Olaf roared, swinging his axe, yet the other evaded easily, each movement fluid as ice. Jon, desperate, kicked the burning horn away from the Whites, then grabbed a second dragonglass weapon. Ghost bounded in, snapping at the other's flank. The creature spun, sword flickering with deadly precision. Ghost barely avoided being cleaved. Grey wind joined, but a single stroke of that chilling blade forced both direwolves back. The watchers converged, torches brandished. The other lashed out, frost crystals forming in the air. Ed cried out as a glancing blow froze the edge of his cloak. Arlen rushed in from behind, spear poised. The other whirled, parrying with lethal speed. For a heartbeat, they locked in a swirl of skill. Arlen, the hidden sword of the morning, crossing weapons with a being of ancient cold. The spear tip scraped the other's side, sending a faint crackle of light. The other slid aside, raising its blade for a killing thrust. Arlen twisted, taking the blow on the spear's shaft, which shattered under the supernatural chill. The watchers gasped. Arlen fell back, snatching up a piece of obsidian from the ground. The other advanced, silent malice in its glowing eyes. Then Jon dashed in from the side, carrying the last of his oil. He flung the liquid at the other's legs. The creature hissed, staggering as the pungent fluid coated its lower limbs. Arlen, seizing the chance, hurled a torch at the creature. Fire ignited, flickering around the other's lower half. A high-pitched shriek emerged, more intense than any wight. The watchers pressed advantage, brandishing dragonglass shards. The other lashed out, killing one northern man with a single slice that froze his chest. But the flames clung, slowing the other's movements. Olaf battered it with his large axe, though the cold almost froze the blade. Arlen sank a chunk of obsidian into the creature's side, pushing it deeper. Cracks of frost spiderwebbed across the other's form. With a final, hate-filled snarl, it shattered into fragments of ice, dissolving into the wind. Panting, the watchers realized the robed hornbearer lay dead in a pool of blood and oil. The horn itself still burned, releasing acrid smoke. The wights around them twitched, some losing their cohesion, as though the magic binding them weakened. Robb scrambled upright, clasping a new spear from a fallen watcher. "Is that it? Did we break the horn?" The watchers glared around. Without the other and the horn, the undead lines faltered. The wights at the rear reeled. The watchers behind them on the wall let out cheers. Mance's entire front line wavered, some wildlings screaming in confusion. Another volley of flaming arrows from above hammered them. It was enough to push them back from the gate. Mormont's voice boomed from the parapets. "They're retreating! Press them!" Encouraged, the watchers and northerners advanced, throwing torches, slaying wights that remained. The robed figures near the horn had either fled or been destroyed. The battered remains of the wildling host began to pull back. Some threw down weapons, others tried to carry away their wounded. The watchers kept up the barrage. Soon it became a chaotic rout. In the swirling gloom, men glimpsed shapes of others fading into the shadows, perhaps vanishing with a last hiss. The watchers did not relent, ensuring every wight they found was burned. The ground was a charnel field of scorched flesh, melted ice, gore, and shattered bone. Jon and Robb collapsed on a snowbank, breathing in ragged gulps. Ghost and gray wind sniffed at the remains, subdued. Arlen knelt, trembling from the strain of that final duel. Olaf panted, leaning on his axe. Ed stood beside them, face pale. The yard smelled of death, but the horn lay in blackened fragments, thoroughly consumed by flame. Perhaps the legendary threat had been undone. Mormont hurried out with more men to confirm the battle's end, ensuring the gate was secured, stamping out any pockets of undead. Archers from the wall continued firing upon the retreating wildlings until they vanished into the forest. The watchers let out ragged cheers. They had withstood the assault. The Horn of Winter, if indeed it possessed the rumored power, had been destroyed. In the aftermath, Castle Black reeled from casualties. Dozens of watchers and northerners lay dead or wounded, but many more survived than had been feared. A few small sections of the outer ice had collapsed, yet the wall itself stood. Men embraced, some weeping in relief or grief. Mance's grand alliance with the others had failed to break the fortress. Mormont took stock of the battered ramparts, then turned to the men in the courtyard, voice resonant. "They tested us with their might and we prevailed. The wall stands. The living endure." A roar of triumph and sorrow rose together. Robb, covered in soot and streaked with blood, found Jon and pulled him into a rough embrace. "We did it," he murmured, disbelief in his eyes. "You destroyed the horn, you and Arlen. You saved us all." Jon shook his head. "Not alone. We all fought. If the others return, we must remain vigilant. But for now," he let out a shaky breath, "they've been repelled." Arlen, still cradling his broken spear shaft, gave Jon a grateful nod. Words failed them. Ghost nudged Jon's leg, as though to confirm he was alive. Olaf helped up Ed, who grumbled that he'd never get the stink of white ash off his boots. Across the yard, watchers formed impromptu details to burn any leftover undead remains. Marsh and Bolton men aided the wounded, distributing bandages, using whatever meager medical skills they had. In the flickering light of dawn, the carnage became starkly visible, but so did the fortress's unbroken walls. They spent the day counting losses, gathering the fallen for a solemn pyre. Mormont supervised from the rampart. T.S. eyes heavy with grief. The Watchers had lost friends, the Northerners had lost loyal soldiers. Yet they had averted the worst fate. That evening, a hush cloaked Castle Black as men lit the great funeral pyres. Arrows soared to ignite the piles, and thick smoke climbed into a sky shot with the pale pink of a lingering sunset. Jon stood with Robb, Ghost, Grey Wind, Arlen, Olaf, Ed, Mormont, and others. None spoke for a long time. The only sound was the crackle of flames, the wails of those mourning lost companions. At last, as the fires died and the wind carried away the embers, Mormont addressed the gathering. His voice was rough. "We have paid dearly, yet I do not doubt these men died keeping the realm safe. Let us remember them, and tomorrow we fortify anew. The Horn of Winter is destroyed, if that was indeed the real horn. The others have withdrawn, their immediate plan foiled. We remain watchful, but for tonight, we honor the fallen." A quiet rumble of agreement passed. Robb placed a hand on Jon's shoulder, eyes brimming with sorrowful respect. Around them, men bowed heads, letting a hush of communal mourning take hold. Over the subsequent days, they repaired damage to the wall as best they could, hammered new barricades at the gate, and scouted the battlefield. Most of the Wildlings had fled deep into the forest or died. Some Watchers speculated that Mance might remain alive, but without the horn or a successful alliance with the others, his grand plan had failed. Whites were discovered here and there, but no large force. The Watchers, strengthened by their victory, systematically burned each one. Ghost and Grey Wind roamed the field, sniffing out undead that tried to hide among corpses. The men had grown efficient at finishing them quickly. During that time, a wave of relief washed through Castle Black. They had faced the darkest threat, lived to tell the tale, and shattered the legendary horn. Even the sternest cynics admitted that unity had saved the day. Robb and Mormont took time to reevaluate the war plan. With the immediate danger receding, some northern forces might return to Winterfell. Others would remain to ensure the Watch was not left vulnerable. Jon helped orchestrate rosters, balancing the Watchers' needs with the Lord's duties in the south. Lord Bolton, ironically, gave a calm suggestion that rotating garrisons could keep the Watch strong without straining the north entirely. The forging of dragonglass continued, albeit at a slower pace now that the crisis had peaked. Men did not forget the cost. Rows of freshly burned pyres marked where brave souls had perished. Each day, Watchers and Northerners worked side by side to clear debris, gather broken weapons, and patch cracks in the ice. The fortress took on a somber sense of triumph. They had survived, but none pretended the threat was gone forever. The others might remain in the far north, still lurking. But for now, the realm had breathing room. One twilight, Jon and Robb strolled along the top of the wall, Grey Wind and Ghost trailing behind. The wind tugged at their cloaks. Jon's injuries were minor, just a few bruises. Robb sported a bandaged arm, courtesy of that brush with the other's icy blade. They paused at a spot overlooking the expanse where Mance's army had assembled, now empty. The drifts showed churned, blackened patches from all the flaming pitch. Nothing but silent snow. Robb released a weary breath. Ned Stark used to say winter might be long, but we'd face it together. I see now that he meant more than just the cold. He meant all that threatens our home. And we did face it, together. Jon nodded. Yes, Father would be proud. They watched for a while, lost in memory. Robb then said, I must soon return to Winterfell. The war in the south still needs my attention, but a portion of my men will remain, rotating over time. The Watchers won't stand alone. Jon felt gratitude well up. Thank you. We'll keep sending ravens if the others stir again. Robb clasped Jon's forearm. Keep safe, brother. The realm needs the Night's Watch in these times. They descended to the courtyard, where men were finishing the day's chores. Arlen hammered a last batch of arrowheads, satisfied that the fortress had enough for any immediate skirmish. A handful of Watchers practiced with each other, perfecting the new maneuvers. Olaf boomed orders at men organizing supply crates. Dolorous Ed carried a load of rations, muttering that it was better than hauling bodies. The entire fortress felt transformed by the crucible of that great battle, a place not merely of watchers but a unified bulwark of the living. At dawn a few days later, Robb Stark prepared to lead a portion of his forces back south. Snow dusted the courtyard. Men lined up to bid farewell. Mormont stood with Robb in front of the main hall, exchanging parting words. Jon waited at Robb's side, Ghost and Grey Wind close. Robb addressed the gathered watchers, voice carrying, "Brothers of the Watch, we have faced the darkest foe together. Your bravery will be sung in the north for generations. Though I must return to see to my kingdom's other battles, I leave many men behind to guard your flanks. If the others or any threat arises again, send word." The king in the north remembers his vow. Mormont dipped his head. "And the Night's Watch shall never forget your service. We remain bound by our oath to guard the realms of men, with you as allies." The watchers gave a hearty salute, some banging spears on the ground. Robb then turned to Jon, clasping his arm. "Farewell, brother. You've more than proven yourself. Father would be proud." Jon swallowed. "Take care, Robb. May your battles in the south find victory. We'll hold the wall." Ghost nudged Robb's hand, as though parting ways. Grey Wind nuzzled Jon for a moment. Then Robb mounted, giving a final wave. The northern column filed out, many men staying behind as arranged, but a sizable portion accompanying their king. The gate lowered behind them, leaving Castle Black a bit quieter, though still brimming with watchers, umbers, and others who had pledged longer service. Life at Castle Black steadied into a watchful normalcy. The watchers kept patrolling, though seldom venturing too far beyond the wall. Occasional rumors drifted in about Mance's battered remnants, or sightings of whites scattered in the far north. No large threat materialized. Eastwatch and the Shadow Tower reported quiet conditions. The realm's immediate crisis had passed. Mormont oversaw a final phase of consolidation, burying the dead, salvaging arms. Arlen, still incognito, resumed forging at a slower pace. He occasionally spared with watchers, though carefully never revealing the flair that might betray him as a fabled knight. Olaf hovered between Eastwatch and Castle Black, ensuring trade routes for the watchers. Ed complained about the monotony of hauling supplies, but the watchers teased that monotony was better than whites. Time passed in that uneasy peace. A handful of Wildling refugees arrived sporadically, claiming they wanted no part of Mance's cause. The watchers placed them under guard, eventually assigning them tasks. Some watchers debated the wisdom of letting so many free folk join them, but Mormont insisted that each new pair of hands might help maintain the fortress if they remained loyal. Jarl's group integrated slowly, laboring in kitchens or stables. They seemed genuinely relieved to be away from Mance's Doomsday Alliance. Summer was not near by any measure, but signs of a modest thaw touched the southern edges of the gift by the time more ravens came bearing news. The Lannister War in the south had reached another turning point, with King's Landing rumored to be in turmoil over the issue of succession. Stannis was quiet, the Targaryen queen still rumored across the sea. The watchers read these tidings with mild detachment. Castle intrigues felt trivial compared to what they had faced. If the others truly lingered in the deep north, a bigger conflict might someday return. For now, though, men went about daily tasks, forging a rare sense of stable routine. Jon found himself occasionally restless. He had joined the watch expecting to stand lonely guard, but now found the fortress bustling with new life, an alliance of men from every corner of the north. He marveled at how fate had twisted. Ed teased that they were more crowded than a market fair, though at least the food was free. Jon laughed, then reminded Ed they survived only because the realm's resources had rallied in time. Quietly, he still missed the old days with fewer eyes, fewer demands. But he also recognized that a solitary watch might not have survived the war that nearly brought the wall down. Arlen, for his part, remained a fixture at Jon's side, though no one suspected his true identity. The watchers respected him as an unassuming older man of uncanny skill. He occasionally guided younger men in sword forms, always carefully dulling any extraordinary technique. Jon sensed the conflict within Arlen. Part of him, perhaps, wanted to reveal the truth, yet he kept the vow to Ned Stark. So long as the realms stood united, maybe that vow no longer carried mortal risk. But neither saw a need to disturb the delicate peace by announcing that the Sword of the Morning lived in secret. For now, they let the simpler story stand. At intervals, Jon walked the battlements at night, reflecting on how House Stark and the Night's Watch had joined to repel the greatest threat in centuries. That synergy might define the realm's future. Perhaps if the rest of Westeros saw the wonders and horrors at the Wall, they too might unify. He remembered the old tales. And if we fail, the night that never ends will descend. But they had not failed. They had faced that darkest hour, destroyed the Horn of Winter, driven back the others. Standing in the icy wind, watching the moonlight glint on newly rebuilt towers, he thought of Ned, of the entire Stark line, how they had guided the North to stand for honor. They had done what needed doing, despite all the wars and divisions. That was enough. One calm morning, a small group of watchers told Jon that Mormont was calling for him at the command chamber. He arrived to find Mormont, Marsh, Olaf, and a few others. Mormont's expression was subdued but pleased. "Snow," he said, "word has come from your brother, the king in the north. He remains entrenched in battles with the Lannisters, but he also wrote that if the watch can be temporarily entrusted to the men who remain, he'd welcome your presence at Winterfell to speak of future cooperation. He suggests you might serve as a key liaison." Jon blinked. "He wants me at Winterfell? I am sworn to the watch." Mormont grunted. "Yes, but we are not so direly pressed as before. We can spare you for a time if it cements a lasting alliance. The vow forbids you from taking titles or wives, but traveling to coordinate is permitted. You are an asset, recognized by the realm's northern king." Jon's mind spun. He had thought never again to dwell at Winterfell, having chosen the Black. Yet the realm's crisis had changed many old rules. If meeting with Robb aided the watch, it might be an extension of his oath. Marsh added, "We have men enough to hold the fortress. The big question is whether you wish to go." Jon swallowed. "If it serves the realm, I'll do it. I remain of the watch. This is not me forsaking my vow. It's a mission of sorts." Mormont nodded. "Precisely. Olaf and a handful of watchers can accompany you. We must keep lines open with the North's leadership. If that helps us in the long run, so be it." And so, unexpectedly, Jon prepared to ride for Winterfell once more, accompanied by Olaf, Ed, Arlen, and a few watchers. The fortress said farewell with no fanfare, just matter-of-fact acceptance that more alliances might be needed. Ghost trotted at Jon's side. Mormont clasped Jon's hand. "You saved us, lad. Now go ensure we remain saved." Olaf joked that after braving Whites, a trip to Winterfell was mere child's play. Ed grumbled it would still be cold. They departed through the main gates, gazing once again on that endless road. The watchers on the ramparts waved. Robb had left months before, but his men had not. They saluted too, a sign of how strongly the realm's unity endured. The journey south proved less harrowing than prior travels in the thick of war. With Mance's host scattered, no sign of large wildling raids hindered them. It commented that without whites, the forests seemed dull. Even so, they remained cautious. They took note that villagers in the gift looked calmer now, some even greeting them with bits of bread or mead. The scars of fear lingered, but hope had grown. A skeleton force from the Watchers patrolled these areas, ensuring no stray undead roamed. Days turned to nights under starlit skies. Arlen hammered on some minor forging tasks at each camp, never removing his hood in public. Olaf told loud tales around the fire. Ed dozed with one eye open. Jon found himself half expecting whites in every shadow, but the road lay quiet. Ghost scouted, returning with calm wafts. The group reached the southern edges of the gift in about a week, crossing the old boundary that led into the north proper. The difference in climate was minimal, still cold, but less biting than near the wall. At length, the familiar silhouette of Winterfell rose on the horizon, gray walls distinct against a broad sky. The travelers paused to let the moment sink in. Jon's heart pounded, memories swirling. He had left as a boy dreaming of the Watch, returned once to rally for the war, and now returned again as a recognized figure who had helped repel the others. The gate guards recognized Olaf's approach, opening wide. Inside the courtyard, men bustled in House Stark cloaks, far more numerous than in older times. War had demanded expansions, but also the presence of new faces. Olaf guided them in. Stable hands hurried to take their horses, respectful once they spotted Watcher's black cloaks. Ghost earned a few wary sidelong glances, though many recalled his presence before. A steward approached, welcoming them. The king in the north is in the great hall, addressing certain lords. He'll see you at once. Jon dismounted, patting Ghost's head. Ed stretched, muttering about how warm it felt compared to Castle Black. Arlen lingered at the rear, scanning the old stones with subdued curiosity. Olaf nodded, letting the steward lead them. Servants commented in hushed tones that the Watcher's presence was an honor. Indeed, the rumors of Jon's deeds had traveled swiftly. They reached the great hall to find Robb seated in the Lord's chair, flanked by Catelyn Stark and a few lords. A hush fell as Jon's party entered. Robb's face lit with an unguarded smile. He rose, stepping down to greet them. "Jon, you've made good time. Welcome back to Winterfell in more peaceful circumstances." Jon bowed, though Ghost trotted forward to sniff at Robb's boots. Robb laughed, ruffling Ghost's ears. He then clasped Olaf's forearm, nodding thanks. "We have much to discuss, but first let me welcome you properly. Mother, you recall Jon and some Watchers from Castle Black." Catelyn Stark stood, her expression softened from earlier times. "Yes, of course. Welcome. We owe you all a debt for keeping the realm safe from the undead. Please make yourselves comfortable. Winterfell is your home for as long as you need." Jon recognized that she meant it sincerely, no longer regarding him with the old frostiness that had once haunted their relationship. Perhaps the war truly had changed them all. Robb signaled the lords to step back, giving them space. Jon introduced Ed, who bowed awkwardly, Olaf, who boomed a greeting, and Arlen, who merely nodded. They were ushered to a side table where cups of hot spiced wine were served. Robb insisted they rest from the road, though he clearly was eager for news of the Watch. Jon took a grateful sip, letting the warmth spread through him. Ed sighed contentedly at the taste of something better than the fortress's thin ale. Soon, they found themselves in a smaller solar with Robb, Catelyn, a few key advisors, and the Watchers. Robb asked about the wall's condition, any further signs of wights, the fate of Mance's scattered wildlings. Jon answered thoroughly, describing how no major attacks had occurred since that fateful day, how the Watchers remained on guard, how many men from the north still served. Olaf confirmed that morale was decent, though men never forgot the possibility of the others returning. Robb nodded, satisfied that the immediate crisis had passed. Then he laid out his plan for continued cooperation. "I aim to maintain a rotating garrison at Castle Black. The realm's lords can each send men for a season, then rotate them home. This ensures the Watch is never weak again. Mormont's vow to accept that is crucial. We must never let the others find us complacent." Jon agreed wholeheartedly. "That is wise, Robb. Lord Commander Mormont will cooperate. He knows how vital your men were to repelling the threat." Catelyn added, "Then we stand in harmony. The threat from beyond might return someday, but with the North and the Watch united, we can face it. Meanwhile, we must also ensure the war with the Lannisters does not destroy us from within." Robb sighed. "Yes, the Lannisters remain a thorn, but at least the Watchers can rest from that. We won't ask them to fight in the south. That is not their vow." For a few days, Jon remained at Winterfell, meeting with lords who wanted to hear first-hand accounts of the undead conflict. He walked the old corridors with a sense of nostalgia, seeing them now so full of soldiers. Sansa and Arya were away, Sansa apparently married or betrothed in some political arrangement, Arya off exploring the broader realm under some arrangement. Bran was said to be at White Harbor forging alliances. Rickon was in the care of maesters. The war had scattered the Starks, yet Winterfell endured, a living symbol of the North's resilience. Catelyn was more cordial than Jon had ever known, showing how sorrow and war had tempered old resentments. He was not her son, but she respected him as a key figure who had helped save their people. At last, with all business concluded, Jon prepared to head north again, returning to the watch. Robb arranged a final supper for them in a small dining hall, just close family and key watchers. Over that meal, they reminisced about Ned, about the dire straits they had overcome. Robb half-joked that if the Lannisters refused to acknowledge the threat of the others, it was their loss, but the North would stand strong. Olaf teased Jon about being the bravest crow he ever saw, while Ed droned a self-deprecating quip that the moment the others appear again, he'd hide behind Jon's cloak. Arlen offered a quiet toast, saying only that it was an honor to witness men of the living realm unite. Robb toasted him in return, praising his forging. None guessed the man's deeper secrets. Next morning, under a pale sun, Jon's party said farewell. Robb embraced Jon tightly, whispering, "We will always be brothers. If the others ever rise again, call me." Jon nodded, voice tight with emotion. "I will. Keep safe, Robb." Ghost and Grey Wind touched noses in a final canine salute. Then the Watchers mounted up, turning their horses north once more. Catelyn waved from the steps, an unspoken blessing in her eyes. The gates opened, letting them depart. Winterfell receded behind in the crisp morning air. Traveling north this time felt almost ordinary, the road safer due to Robb's ongoing efforts. They encountered more small folk who recognized Olaf's giant stature, offering respectful bows or shy thanks. Ed cracked jokes about the Wyas of Whites being more exciting than endless riding. Arlen merely observed in silence. Jon found he missed the quiet rigors of Castle Black, a place he had come to see as truly his home. The Watchers were his brothers, bonded by a vow the entire realm now respected. Even if Ned's memory lingered strongly in Winterfell, Jon knew his path lay with the Black Cloak. Yet he felt no regret. That path had brought him purpose, helping unify the realm in its darkest hour. Their arrival at Castle Black was met with relief and cheers. Men thronged the courtyard, eager for news of the South. Mormont welcomed them in the common hall, wanting updates. Jon recounted how Robb intended to continue rotating men, ensuring the Watch never faced the others alone again. Mormont's stony face relaxed into something like a grin. "That is all I could hope for. The old feud where the Watch was neglected is done. We have found a new age. Let us ensure we remain worthy of that trust." Life resumed a steady pattern. The Watchers maintained vigilant patrols, though the forest stayed quiet. The new Wildling refugees worked steadily, abiding by the fortress's rules. No large white sightings troubled them. Perhaps the others, thwarted, had receded into the deep wastes. The Watchers refused to assume final victory, but they no longer trembled at every wind gust. In a sense, they had formed the future Ned Stark dreamed of. A strong North, a strong Watch, a realm united against the true darkness. That evening, Jon and Mormont shared a cup of ale in the Old Solar. The Lord Commander gazed into the hearth. "We've come far, Snow. From that first day you joined us as a lad with illusions of glory. You've shed illusions but gained a cause. The men respect you. I suspect if I were to pass the cloak of Lord Commander, many would name you. But you're still young, so no fear of that yet." Jon blinked in surprise. "I'm only a servant of the Watch, my lord. I'd prefer it that way." Mormont gave a dry chuckle. "We'll see. The realm changes. The Watch changes. But we must keep the vow. Now go on, get some rest. I expect you at sunrise drills." Smiling faintly, Jon excused himself. Ghost padded at his side. Outside, a faint hush cloaked the courtyard. Arlen tended a brazier, warming his hands. He caught Jon's eye, nodding in silent camaraderie. Ed reclined by the stables, bantering with a pair of umbers about the merits of a quiet night. The entire fortress held that sense of shared relief, an enduring unity that overcame old boundaries. Jon reflected that if the others ever returned in force, they'd find a realm better prepared. Until that day, The men of the Night's Watch would stand guard, armed with obsidian, armed with alliances forged in the crucible of terror. He wandered up a flight of stairs to a small parapet, gazing at the wall's towering bulk. In the sky above, stars glittered. A memory stirred. Standing here when Mance's forces threatened, the horn of winter blasting away. Now, those nights seemed almost dreamlike, though the scars on the ice remained. The Watchers had survived the darkest assault in centuries. Perhaps tomorrow or next year or in some distant generation, the others might try again, but for now the land drew breath. The war in the south continued, but the north was at peace with itself. If that was not a victory, what was? He closed his eyes, thinking of Ned, of the vow he had sworn, of the vow the Watchers had renewed. The wind carried faint echoes of men training in the yard, forging a future free from the terror that had nearly consumed them. A hush of contentment welled in Jon's chest. He was no lord, never to hold a castle in his own name, yet he had found a home here, among Watchers and friends, forging alliances that transcended old resentments. The day might come when the realm needed them again, but they would be ready. That was the legacy of House Stark and the Night's Watch combined. A legacy of guardians, a bulwark that the others could not break. Jon turned, descending to the courtyard where Ghost waited. In that moment, the fortress was quiet but alive with purpose. Ranks of men strolled beneath torchlight, greeting him with respectful nods. Arlen gave him a subdued smile. Ed performed some minor chore, half complaining as usual. Olaf barked laughter with a cluster of Watchers. The North's banners fluttered from the battlements, side by side with the black of the Watch. Together they had stood for the realms of men, and together they would stand as long as the night was kept at bay. Jon stepped into the next hour of his life, certain that whatever fresh winds blew from the dark corners of the world, they would meet it with flame and unity. And if the day ever came when the others rose once more, a new generation of Watchers and Northerners would remember how the wall had stayed unbroken, how the horn of winter's evil had been undone, how the living had triumphed. He inhaled the cold air, letting it fill his lungs, hearing faint laughter from the yard, sensing the watchful presence of ghosts and heroes gone by. This was their legacy, a fortress stronger than fear, a vow mightier than despair. In that hush, where starlight gleamed on the ice and hope kindled in men's hearts, Jon Snow felt at peace, secure in the knowledge that as long as they all kept watch, the realm would endure.